Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of T.N.T Garage Performance. And I know what you're thinking. I got a haircut. Actually, that's not the case. My head just got bigger and sucked the hair in, which is a win-win. But anyway, today we're coming back to the chassis build for the checker gaster. And what we're going to do is work from front to back, buttoning up this chassis. I need to clean off the brackets of the front axle, get that squared up, get it in its final position. Then we're going to move down the frame, put our body mounts on, finish the X brace, and brace it up a little bit in here, put some fish plates in, clean it up as we go back, and I picked up a set of motor plates for that big block. So we're going to mock the engine in the chassis and probably set the body back on it to get everything ready to go, make sure all our mounts are correct, and even possibly get a good look at what this car is going to look like. Also, I got some wheels to put on the front of this thing that'll eventually get a matching set in the rear, and I think you'll like them. So let's get to it. Well, first things first, to get the axle out, I'm going to go ahead and blow these tack welds off of my spring hangers, because I'm actually going to put the shackle at the rear, and I'll explain my theory behind that as we get to it. But I need to blow these off. We're going to get leaf springs out from underneath here, get the chassis supported, and then start cleaning up that bracketry on the axle. And I'm probably going to make those spring pads work. I'm just going to take a 1/2 inch out of the radius as perfectly as I can, and then set them on there and burn them in. But we got to get it cleaned up first. All right, let's get this thing up to where I can work with it. See if I don't blow my back out. There we go. Well, we got it up a little higher. I can actually work on it and not hurt my back by bending over. So let's get to getting these brackets off. All right. Well, we got our axle cleaned up. All the brackets are off. I also modified my spring seats to fit the 2.5 inch axle. So now that that's done and that's done, I'm going to go ahead and hang my springs from the chassis. And what I'm going to do is just simply use some zip ties to kind of hold them up. That way I can loosely move them and get the axle up into place. So first thing is, I got to get this spun around and on the floor. There we go. All right. Well, before I get too crazy, I got the axle on its wheels. I got a little bar put in there for steering. And I'm going to set up my initial caster for a couple reasons. Usually you do this last, but my style spring pads are welded to the axle. There's no U-bolts, none of that go over the axle on a plate that would sandwich the spring. So just when I go to set the axle in square, my pads aren't going to move, anything like that. Makes it a lot easier. So when you're doing a straight front axle like this, you basically want, a lot of guys say, 8 to 10 degrees of caster. And what caster is, if you're looking at the wheel where your ball joints are, if you tip it back, that's more back or forward is caster. We want to tip it back to 8 to 10 degrees of caster And when you have it tipped back like that, it makes the front end more stable. So I've got myself an angle finder here, and I know that the pitch my leaf springs are going to sit are about 2.5 degrees. So that means I want about 7.5 degrees of caster between the pad and the axle here, and that'll tip me back to 10. So I've got an angle finder here. We're going to set it on the flat in the axle, and it shows 8 degrees. So 8 plus 2.5 is 10.5 degrees. So that's where that's going to be leaned back. So I'm going to want to set this at -5 degrees. Take that away. 5 right there. So we'll buzz this in. Oh. All right, we've got those set up. I'm going to lay a couple more tacks in. I'm not going to burn it in just yet till I get the whole thing assembled, and then we can burn it in. All right. Well, quite some time later, we've got the axle right where it needs to be. We've got our 120-inch wheelbase set up. I've got the axle centered in the frame rails. Now, I just want to make sure my springs are even. A little under a 1/2 inch on that perch. 3/8 exposed. 3/8 exposed. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up a little bit with a grinding wheel and tack my front leaf perches in. Once we get the front perches tacked in, I can let the axle down and set where our rear shackle is going to go. Now that we got the front spring perches locked in, I'm going to kind of straighten up this back here, because if I measure the spread on my springs at the front, we're just under 37 3/8, and at the back, we're just at 37 1/4. So the back of this spring actually needs to come out, judged by the chassis. So, once I find my hammer, which is right there, I'm just going to tap it out, give it a few good wallops. So, I'm going to finish burning in the inside of the spring perches, and then we can work on dropping the axle and getting our rear shackles positioned into place. All right. Well, before I get too crazy, like I said before, I did get this squared up. Now, I measured in several different areas. Number one, I've got one of my tape measures attached to the rear axle at the tube, and I actually had 2 attached back there to the front of the tube. So I just measured to the front of this tube, because they're both 2.5 inches in diameter, and made sure those measurements were equal. I also measured from the center of the rear hub to the center of the ball joint, and that was just make sure it was equal side to side. So we're at exactly 120-inch wheelbase, and we are even in the frame, and I've already got my caster built in a little bit. Now, if the caster is off after this, I can put shims in there to straighten it out. Now, when it comes to mounting your leaf springs, there's a few different schools of thought. It really doesn't matter if you have the shackle in the front or in the back. Originally, I wanted the shackle in the front. I guess I'll just put that there. So having a shackle in the front, you know, kind of from the front of it looks a little cooler, I think. But one thing to remember, and this is something I have a lot of experience with solid axle vehicles, particularly something like with a quad link and coil springs, is this is your main pivot of the spring. It does not move at all. So if you're going to put it in the back, you want that pretty low. And the reason being is if my fist is the axle tube, and this is where your spring bolt is, if it's in the back of the chassis, you do not want it angled down like that. So you want to drop the actual bolt for the spring. And the reason for that, and what I learned with trailing arm type stuff, is that the more extreme angle you get from your axle to your mounting point, when you hit bumps, your axle's first instinct isn't just to go up, it's going to want to push back into your chassis and destroy the bushing. So the more even you have, the flatter you have it from where your axle is to your mounting bolt, the smoother it'll go over bumps. Now the same isn't so critical if you have your main mounting point in the front like this. I have it angled down just a little bit, so when I hit bumps, it'll move up and down freely. Of course, pivoting it down like that is going to buck up into the car pretty good when you hit bumps, and doing it like that is going to bump down pretty hard. So if you look at like a rear leaf spring setup, you'll see that the main point is at the front part of the chassis. And that's basically because it locates your axle, and it also angles up in the rear as well. So you get a much smoother ride the more you are level from your front point to your actual axle itself. In the front pickup point and a front spring setup, it'll ride pretty good, angled down a little bit, and it also gives me my caster. So, time to move on to getting our shackles mounted. So I'll get set up for that, and we'll get you guys in here and kind of my school of thought on doing it. Now, what I'm going to do when it goes about my shackle in the back here is a lot of people have different ways of doing it. And since I don't have the body on the car right now and the engine and everything and all the weight to put on it, and I really don't want to take it back apart to pull the leaf pack apart to get all the, push up, see how much room I have to play, is what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the axle drop, and then I'm going to position my shackle so it's in line with the arch of the spring. And what that does, if this is full droop right here, what that allows the spring to do is when it compresses, it's able to swing and not run out of travel. And that's one thing you really want to avoid, is positioning this like that right off the bat. Because when your spring flattens out, you're going to run out of travel pretty quick. Your spring's going to bind, and it's basically going to stop being a spring. So I'm going to drop the axle a little bit more until I'm happy with the angle of my shackle to the spring. I want that to be in a curving arc, so when there is weight on the car, the shackle will have plenty of room to articulate. So I'm going to do that on both sides, do a little cleanup, and get it welded into place. Alright, with the front axle pretty well stuck in there, before I do really any finish welding on this, I'm going to continue making some pieces that'll help finish up the frame. Now last night, before I could go to bed, I had to make these pieces here. And what these do, these will close up the frame down here and also strengthen it. So I'll get you guys in closer with that when I go to install them. But there's a few other things I need to make. And one is the front body mounts. So I'm going to take a spare piece of square stock that I have, rectangle stock, the 2x3, and I'm going to make the two front body mounts. I can reuse the center ones off of the old chassis. But these particular guys are 11 inches long, so I'm just going to mark out 11 inches and I'm going to cut it diagonally from point to point, and that'll give me two body mounts. So it ought to work out pretty snazzy. So now what I can do is get myself a mark from point to point to create my two halves to make the body mounts. There we go, two body mounts. All right, the next thing I'm gonna do while I have my cutting wheel out is I'm gonna make some fish plates for these junctures here inside the frame where it steps up. And basically all I'm gonna do is make little teeny tiny stop signs, little octagons out of this plate, cut them out, and then those will be my fish plates in these joints here. So that's gonna be pretty simple. Now it's time to position our frame mounts, and that's where this comes in handy. I know from the front of this mount for the body, our front mount is 66.5 inches. So, tape measure, and we'll mark 66.5 right there. There's our 66.5, and then our center body mount is 28.25, which I'll mark that on here. Now looking at my straight edge, we don't have any gaps. We're good to weld, but to keep it from pulling up, I'm going to put tacks down at the bottom, and that should set us up for success. Figured it's a nice day, so I'd roll the chassis outside, but what I'm working on right now is finishing up this X-brace. So I took some of my scrap steel laying around, and I'm going to triangulate that guy right there. It'll go over the fish plate, it'll go into the X-brace, and then we'll just fill it up there. So looks pretty good. We could probably burn it in. We'll get the bottom taken care of, get our little pieces in here, and then that should strengthen up the frame quite a bit there. Well, a little bit of update. I got a new tank, 7525 yesterday. Even though it said it was full, had a little seal on it, I got about an hour welding out of a 80 cubic foot bottle, so I had to get a new one of those, so excuse some of these welds here because I was literally fighting that bottle. But we got our brace in here that connects the X brace to here over the fish plate, which will make it super solid. And I also cut out these plates here to fill it in so it'll look nice. Does it need it? Probably not, but it'll look better. And then this part of the X brace actually hung lower And I was thinking about ways to do it, so I just pie cut out of it and push it up, and it meets my channel underneath, and it'll just kind of rise up a little bit. But we'll go ahead, buzz this shut, finish welding this, and of course the same side is, or the other side is the same way. So we'll get all this buzzed together, and then pretty much the last thing I need to do on the chassis before we go to drop the body back on it is right there, get those welded to the tubes and knock off the old body mount rubbers, and we should be able to put this on top of there. So let's keep burning. Well, it's a little better when you actually have a full bottle of gas. Kind of funny how that works. Thanks, local tank gas supply. I'm trying not to say, even though it's sitting next to the thing, person supply. Good job. All right, well, I got pretty much everything on the chassis buzzed up that I want to get done right now. The next thing we got to do is, well, mock up the engine and transmission in this chassis. And to know how to do that properly, well, we got to put the body back on. So we're going to go ahead to skip ahead mode. I'm going to push this out, clean the floor, slide the body over, we'll pick her up and roll the chassis underneath it. So let's get to it. Well, she's on a chassis for the first time and actually will roll on all four wheels. The video just doesn't give it justice. You guys will see it in the morning. But first, a little cleanup in the garage. I'm going to push the cherry picker out of the way, get all this stuff swept up. And we are going to dig out the big block, attach it to that bell housing I picked up today from a friend, and throw the 4-speed on the back and begin measuring so we can set up our mid plate and front plate. So, oh God, that makes me happy. Well, all right, we have the body temporarily on the chassis, and the reason why I say temporarily is it's gonna come back off to do floors anyway, but I want to get this chassis as close to done as I can get it within the next 20 hours, I suppose. And what that's going to take is taking the big block, hooking it to the 4-speed via the scatter shield, and we're going to set it down with the cherry picker about where it needs to be in the car with the heads on it. And then we can figure out where our motor plates are going to go. And then after that, body will come back off. We'll do the floors in it. So let's get this thing up on the cherry picker, get it attached to that Super T.N.T. Alright, well, we got the big block, the scatter shield, and the trans just kind of sitting in there on jacks now. What I need to do before I get the final position to put the plates in is grab my angle finder, and I'm going to go underneath and pretty much position the transmission so we have equal and opposite angles from the back of the trans to the pinion. That way we can locate the tail housing and then kind of set up the angle of the block from there. So I'm going to get this thing set up, and we'll get underneath it and check it out. All right, well, I saved you guys a bunch of boredom of mocking up these motor plates. It was a lot of back and forth, measuring back and forth, yada, yada, yada. But we got the engine at the right angle. The transmission will be at a 4.5 degree angle. The pinion is at like a 6, but it needs to come down a little bit anyway. And you want equal angles within a 1/2 degree. So we'll probably shim the rear end to bring the pinion down. But the plates are fitted in. That one's all notched. It's attached to the front of the block. I just got the head sitting on there to make sure we clear. And look at the other side here. I also had to blast a hole in the mid plate so the steering comes through, but that rag joint will go away. Everything kind of works out pretty good. I just set that cylinder head on top for weight wise, but we got ourselves marked here so I can build my tabs so we can bolt these in. And she's looking like a car. Decided to throw the front clip on it so you guys can really get a look at what I'm driving at here. That thing just looks perfect. That is awesome. You'll be able to see the headers coming out, see the side of the engine. You'll see the fender well headers just popping up and over and out in the side pipes. God, I'm happy with that. And don't mind the tape. That's the new fender mounting system. But that is pretty good if I don't fall over tripping over the bumper. But that's sweet. Alright guys, that wraps up this video. I'm very happy with the amount of progress I made on this car between getting the front end set up. Everything's ready to go there. We got the X-brace done. We got the body mounts on. We got a lot of the finish welding done. The frame is structurally sound. It's straight. It's true. The front end's true. And even though you didn't really get to see a lot of it because it got really boring, is I got the big block mocked in with the motor plates, and we got our scatter bell and everything. The angles are all set up. And I figured I'd give you guys a little treat that have been following this build of what the car is overall going to look like in the stance. Granted, it'll have some weight on it once everything's done, but this stance is pretty much nailed. I absolutely love it, and it's always nice to see a little glimpse into what the project's going to wind up like. Now, coming up, Probably next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull the body back off, and we're gonna get hammering, getting those floors in the car with the floors, toe boards, rockers, all that. Get the body solid, and then finish welding the quarters, do the other side, get that done, and then we can start moving into getting a coating on this paint. I'm just gonna clear the car as it sits. There will be a special color for the roof and the wheels, because these are US wheel rat rod style wheels. I got 15 by 5s in the front. We're going to run 15 by 10s in the rear on drag radials. Also, what will be coming up is this front end I'm going to make tilt, and that's going to be pretty cool. So you're going to want to check that out. You know, I'm doing this project by myself in a 2-car garage with whatever tools I have. And, well, you've seen in how many videos how far I got. So if you just stick with your project and you're willing to learn on the fly like I am, you can do anything. Because it's not about the tools in your toolbox. The most important tool you could possibly have is the ability to learn. So that being said, you can check out the rest of this project in the playlist for Checker Gas, or you can check out all of my other projects along with it. And, well, you can find me at T.N.T Garage and Performance on Facebook, T.N.T Garage and Performance on Instagram, and like, share, and subscribe when you watch this video. You know, you get to see more of this build and everything else I have to offer on the channel, that I really strive to do quality content for everyone watching. So I'm going to stand back and admire this thing some more before I clean the garage and push it in. And, well, until next time, remember, if it ain't broke, fix it till it is. We'll see you soon.